Well, today I'm going to be talking about the poetry of Rudyard Kipling. Kipling is an intriguing character, now often known as a children's book author, but at the time that was not his reputation at all. He was a major literary figure and somebody whose novels and poems and collections of stories were enjoyed by adults as well as by children. Kipling was born in Bombay in 1865, and so he was already 35 years old at the turn of the century. He lived until 1936. He won in 1907 the Nobel Prize for Literature. He was the youngest recipient ever, and also the first writer in English to win that award. Roger Kimball is referred to as the poet laureate of civilization. At times, Kipling's stock has been very, very high. He's been recognized as an extraordinarily great poet, short story writer, novelist. At other times, like the present, his stock is relatively low. A lot of scholars don't think very well of Kipling. I happen to be a fan, and I'll try to explain why, but Kipling is somebody who sort of comes in and out of fashion with the times. Now why? Well, partly it's because of the themes of his poetry. His poetry is something that rhymes, for one thing. It's kind of an old style of poetry. It's much more like 19th century literature in a lot of ways than most 20th century literature. It's almost like a bit of the 19th century that persists into the 20th century. And in fact, his role is really one of trying to defend the values of the 19th century. He's trying to affirm a traditional conception of morality, of virtue, and fairly traditional ideals in the face of cynicism. He looks at things like the First World War, on which he wrote an entire book, by the way, and he lost a son in the war. In the book, he has, at the end of the battle he's talking about, in which his son was killed, he has a list of the men killed in the battle, and his son appears in the list, but otherwise is not mentioned at all. Kipling is somebody who embodied a sort of Victorian ideal of morality, of virtue, of, in this case, the British stiff upper lip, and he thought, in particular, in reaction to the war, that to decide what the First World War meant, that there was something fundamental wrong with Western civilization, or with moral values, or with ideals of virtue and so on. He thought that was a mistake. The problem was not with those traditional values, it was actually with departures from those traditional values, and what we needed is to go back and reinvigorate them. So he sees the cynicism, the loss of faith that results from the First World War as a basic threat to civilization. Now, he had been sounding those themes for decades before the First World War, but after the war he became even more concerned. He thought that people were losing touch with the basic truths that kept our civilized life together good, wonderful, as well as possible, and thought that if those ideals were lost, we were all in profound danger. So he saw that cynicism, not just as a threat to his preferred moral values, not just as a threat to his preferred conception of value, or his ideal of humanity. Instead, he saw that civilization itself was under attack. And he was concerned about that attack. He didn't know what could replace those values as a foundation for civilized life together. Here's the way that another writer, Evelyn Waugh, put Kipling's point. Kipling believed this civilization was something laboriously achieved, which was only precariously defended. He wanted to see the defenses fully manned. He hated the liberals because he thought them gullible and feeble, believing in the easy perfectibility of man and ready to abandon the work of centuries for sentimental qualms. Now, Kipling is somebody who, in other words, is looking at civilization and saying, civilization is not something you should be taking for granted. It's something that is the construct of generation after generation, and it's actually easily destroyed. It's important to defend it. There are all sorts of forces in nature and within humanity itself that are out to destroy civilization. It is not something to be taken for granted. So it's easy to assume that we can play with the details and perfect human relationships, perfect societies, perfect human beings themselves. But, he says, wait a minute, how sure should you be that human nature could be perfected? Think about, we've talked about all of the various kinds of injustices, of tragedies, of crimes, of things that people do that seem far from ideal. Do you really think it's possible to change human beings in such a way as to eliminate all that? Could there be a society where there was no crime, where there was no injustice, where there was no such thing as a violation of moral ideals? Kipling doubts it. And indeed, many of his stories, in fact, probably the stories he read and encountered as children, are about the jungle, or about people in villages where nature is very close at hand. And his point, in a sense, is that we're all actually that far from nature. In fact, we're all really one EMP attack from being back to nature. Imagine that such a thing were to occur and there were no electricity. And imagine just that loss of electric power and being, let's say, not restored for years. How would you survive if there were no electric power? Now, electricity is only a little more than 100 years old. I mean, there was electricity before that. But organized use of electricity for power, it's only about a century old. And yet, how would you survive if there were no electricity? There would be no refrigeration. Right? There would be almost no transportation. I mean, how would you run your car? You might have one of these cars that has, well, I don't have one like this. I don't have a car that has the electronic thing. I have a car that you still have to do that. And the windows wouldn't go out. Now that's electric. I only recently got a car where you can crank the windows. But still, and I still keep my 1979 Buick, partly because nothing's in it is really electrical. I can just push it down the street and start it. But how would I get gasoline for my 1979 Buick? I mean, gas pumps are run by electricity, right? And as soon as you start thinking about that, you start realizing, wait a minute, civilization as we know it is really constructed on a number of very thin fibers. Well, his point is, yes, it is, and it always is. It's not just that our use of electricity makes us especially vulnerable. Civilization is especially vulnerable. Think about what happens in the wake of a hurricane, or in the wake of a tsunami, or a tornado, or something else that's immensely destructive. All of a sudden, people are back to very elemental things. And in those kinds of situations, civilization might be affirmed, civilization might fall apart fast. It's very important to have a firm foundation of moral values to deal with such situations. Now, what is he really worried about here? We've looked at a couple of views that are willing to throw out lots of things for this goal of perfecting human societies and human beings themselves. For example, Wilson? Well, Wilson, sort of. I mean, I don't know if he had perfection in mind, but something much better than the reality in mind, yeah. But yes, going back to Rousseau, Marx, Lenin, all of those were projects of trying to not only restructure society, but remold human nature. Wilson has some aspects of that in common. He's less extreme, thankfully. But what other kinds of projects are there that you might think of as being like that? Where we're going to try to remold society and remold human beings in the process and perfect them. Yeah? Good. Communism in general is such a thing. In the 20th century, we're going to encounter a number of movements like this. Freud, you can see, is doing this through the use of psychology to try to solve neuroses and make people a different kind of human being that's going to transform civilization as well as individual lives. In any case, Kipling has a lot of big utopian schemes like that in mind. Yes, question?
Can I argue that enlightenment is a departure from old medieval ideas?
The Enlightenment certainly is a departure from old medieval ideas. And so when we think about what Kipling is talking about here, notice he's not saying, don't change anything. But changes are things to be based on moral values. A change that is based on an attack on moral values is something that he worries about. So for example, you might, and a lot of people have drawn a distinction between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. Why? The American Revolution was essentially saying, wait a minute, we have certain rights as Englishmen granted by Magna Carta, and they're being denied by King George. And so it was an attempt to go back to the moral values that had already been affirmed and say, that those are moral values we want to take seriously. The French Revolution, on the other hand, was trying to redefine moral values in a completely new way. Liberty, equality, fraternity. That wasn't going back to something already affirmed in French culture. It was something that was an attempt to have a new ideal imposed on that civilization. And so there's a tricky question there about when an ideal is really a refinement and an improvement of the values we already affirm, and when it's an attempt to restructure the values of a civilization and restructure that civilization itself. Kipling certainly isn't opposed to all reforms, though as we'll see, he's a cynic about a lot of things. Now, what are some of his basic themes? One of them is the fragility of civilization. He sees, partly by having a childhood in India, in a location that was, well, only partially urbanized at the time, that civilization is kind of a thin veneer over the jungle, and that it yields easily. His second theme is that civilization rests on a variety of things. On trust. It's important that people trust one another. If they don't, then civilization collapses quickly. It's based on a sense of unity of purpose. People have to recognize that in some sense they're in this together in order to be willing to cooperate, in order to trust one another. And ultimately it rests on a willingness to use violence. Now this is the part that Kipling recognizes a lot of people won't want to hear. But civilization, he says, really does ultimately rest on a willingness to use violence to defend it. Here is what George Orwell said about Kipling. He was a fan. He said, Kipling's grasp of function, of who protects whom, is very sound. And I should say here, by the way, Orwell was a socialist. He's not coming at this from the same political point of view as Kipling. Nevertheless, he thinks these themes are important themes. He says he sees clearly that men can only be highly civilized, while other men, inevitably less civilized, are there to guard and feed. So, in short, it's possible to run the BBC, to have a university, to engage in philosophy and art and music and lots of the other things that are expressions of a civilization, by virtue of the fact that some people are there willing to use violence in order to defend that civilization. Who does he have in mind? Good, the police. Who else? The military. Who else? Firefighters. Who else? I mean, maybe each one of us, right? Suppose someone came into this classroom and said, let's imagine, it's just some very tough person, okay? Just comes in and says, hey, challenge you all, fist fight. 1-on-1, together, doesn't matter. Just beat the hell out of you. Okay? What are you going to do? I say, no volunteers, I'll pick one on, all right, you, let's do it. Okay? Are you just going to sit there and let this guy beat her up? Some of you are just going to laugh. No, right, you're going to try to stop this person, I hope. Anyway, that's something that seems like, it's here. I mean, yes, some people say, yeah, when seconds count, the police are only minutes away. And so you might think, look, in the end, it's not just the police and military and so on, though it certainly does include those people. It may have to include a lot of us who will use violence if in the end we have to. Now, Orwell says those who abjure violence can do so only because others are willing to commit violence on their behalf. So it may be you think, I'm peaceful, I'm a pacifist. No, if he came in and started doing that, I think it's my moral duty to turn the other cheek and allow that person to beat us all up. But, Orwell says basically, yeah, it's a luxury that you can think of. It's a luxury, you're able to think that only because you're not in that situation and because other people are willing to use violence to defend you. So, Kipling's concerned about people who are willing to take all this for granted. He thinks that a lot of intellectuals, in particular, are willing to take it for granted. We've talked about this vision of the anointed, where intellectuals sort of see themselves as understanding things and deserving greater power. Kipling sees that sort of thing, and he deplores it. He thinks there's something fundamentally wrong with taking the general idea of a two-level theory, such as the ones we've talked about, and then saying, aha, those who have the theory, they should be put in charge of things. In particular, that intellectuals should be put in charge. He says, no, that's not the case at all. In fact, intellectuals are those who are most likely to take basic things in civilization for granted, to forget that it all rests on slender reeds, to forget that it exists only because some people are willing to commit violence to defend it. And so, here is a poem where he makes this sort of point. It's a poem called Tommy. about British soldiers. And it's one where he is trying to express admiration for the military, but also to point out that a lot of people don't have that admiration and in effect take all this for granted. So here's how it goes. This is actually a soldier speaking, okay? Yes, making not the uniforms that guard you while you sleep is cheaper than them uniforms, and they're starvation cheap. And hustling drunken soldiers when they're going large a bit, 5 times better business than parading in full kit. Then it's Tommy this and Tommy that, and Tommy, how's your soul? But it's thin red line of heroes when the drums begin. So in short, yeah, people make fun of the military or the police or whatever that, until they need one, right? Until all of a sudden violence breaks out, until the country's attacked, until some criminal invades their house, and suddenly, thin red line of heroes. All of a sudden, people's attitude changes. And so his point is, look, we shouldn't take all that for granted. We shouldn't take for granted the people who defend our ability to be in a position where we don't have to think about that every day. Another theme of Kipling's, one way of putting this is that Kipling doesn't want us to forget the concept of the enemy, to recognize that there are people out there and there are natural forces out there that will tend to destroy civilization if we let them. And so it's important to be on our guard and capable of defending it. Another theme, the importance of social capital. He doesn't have that term, it's a more recent vintage, but this is something that I think unifies a lot of what he's concerned about. What is social capital? It's a matter of social networks and the norms that go along with those networks. These are norms of reciprocity, of trustworthiness, that tie people together, that enable them to get along together. So for example, a university it's a kind of social network. A class like this is a kind of social network. And there are associated norms. There are things that each of us is supposed to do and not do. Now some of these might be moral, like don't go around beating up other people in the class. But some of them are really not exactly moral, but nevertheless a question of appropriate or inappropriate behavior. So there are all sorts of norms that govern behavior in a classroom. What are some of those norms, other than the big moral considerations, like don't kill, don't steal, etc., etc.? What are some other norms that are specific to this social setting? Yeah. Okay, norms of etiquette. Some of those are just the broader norms of etiquette in our culture, but some of them are specific to this. So what would some of those be? Yeah. Okay, not speaking at the same time I'm speaking. It would be an obnoxious norm, or rather an obnoxious bit of behavior. If I came in and I'm talking, and somebody's sitting in the back row, and they just keep talking.
Don't play on your phone.
Don't play on your phone, he says. Yeah, well, okay, yeah, look, some people are very concerned about the use of computers and phones and all of that. Actually, I don't care. I mean, if you want to sit there and play Pokemon Go while I'm talking about this, it's okay. For one thing, I know from experience, it doesn't take that much brain power. At least that's what I tell my wife as I talk to her while playing Pokemon Go. So on one level, I don't really mind this, but also you're paying me to do this, right? Or at least your parents are, or the state of Texas is, or something. And so, you know, if you want to do the equivalent of buying the burrito and then just spilling it on the floor or feeding it to the dog, that's okay. You know, that's your right. You can come here and listen to my words of wisdom and think, yeah, whatever, let me check my fantasy team. Okay, so I'm not bothered by that. I figure I should be so entertaining that you don't even think of doing any of those other things, and if I'm not, well, that's bad, but, you know, it's partly my fault. So I don't actually consider that a violation of an ethical norm, though some people would. Now, what other kinds of norms might govern our behavior together that are quite specific? Yeah?
Academic integrity.
Academic integrity, okay, good. I want you to actually follow the rules. For example, don't plagiarize on your papers. That's an important one. Another important one, when the final exam comes around, don't cheat. With the quizzes, I don't care if you work together. There, it's fine. But that's an explicitly stated norm, where I say, look, if you want to take quizzes together, that's okay. They're about learning the stuff, and if learning it in groups is better for you, fine. Form a group and do the quizzes as a group. That's okay. Yeah?
student-professor relationships.
Good, student-professor relationships. There are all sorts of norms that govern that. Ways in which you're supposed to behave, ways in which I'm supposed to behave, and in particular, ways in which each of us is not supposed to behave. And so, that's something important. And notice all of these norms can change over time. Basic moral norms, like do not kill, do not steal, those tend to persist over time. But just as rules of etiquette can change, so these kinds of rules can change. My own dissertation director. This is a weird story. I still find, even in 1975 when I first heard this, I found this hard to believe. But anyway, his second wife, how did this happen? There was a student in his class, and he was lecturing, and this girl thought he was frequently making eye contact with her as he lectured. And so one day, she came up after class and just said, "Professor, I want to live with you."
What?
And he said, "Okay." And they got married.
Wow.
Okay, that's pretty weird. It was weird then. Now, that sort of thing would be inappropriate on both sides. Don't come up to me and ask if you can live with me. And also, I promise not to say yes if you're crazy. Okay? But that's the kind of thing that, might change over time. So in any event, in fact, in Platonic dialogues, Socrates is frequently trying to seduce his students. And I guess in ancient Greece that was okay. I don't know. They're very disturbing to read if you pay attention to that dimension now. In any event, this is something that can change over time. These norms are partly broad moral norms that are universal, but partly they're very specific to a given cultural situation and a given kind of relationship. Francis Fukuyama puts the concept this way. It's the ability of people to work together for common purposes in groups and organizations. So social capital is what enables us to work together productively to achieve our common goals. It's the existence of a certain set of informal values or norms shared among members of a group that permit cooperation among them. Now notice some of these groups might be official, like registering for a class at the University of Texas. Some might be quite informal, just people in a neighborhood who happen to know each other. Some might be fairly persistent. Others might be just temporary. A bunch of people standing at the street corner waiting for the bus and wondering why it's so late, and so on. So these groups can have all sorts of different characters, and different norms might be appropriate to them. But social capital is what enables all of them to function. Robert Putnam, maybe the leading researcher on the idea of social capital, has said this: it's really a question of features of social organizations, such as networks, norms, social trust, that facilitate coordination and cooperation for mutual benefit. So it's these kinds of things that enable people to work together. Now, a community can have lots of social capital, or it can have relatively little. You can have a community that's high trust, where people know these norms, they observe them, they respect one another. Or you could have organizations and groups where actually it's pretty low trust. People do not cooperate easily, they don't coordinate well, they don't obey various norms. So give me an example of a high trust group, an organization where, yes, people respect these norms, people are productive as a result of it. There's a sort of thick social fabric of people having lots of connections to each other. What would be such a community? Yeah. Good, a family, at least a normal family, a well-functioning family is a good example of this. Maybe a dysfunctional family like The Simpsons is a good example of the opposite. Good, smaller organizations on campus are often like this. The University of Texas at large is something that has a certain amount of social capital, but it's so large that actually you can worry about the degree to which there are these networks and norms that cross the entire campus. But there are lots of smaller groups where there are very strong bonds of trust, of cooperation, and a real feeling of togetherness and shared value. And so there are all sorts of groups like that. What are some other high trust, high social capital groups in society at large? Yeah?
You have a troop of soldiers.
Okay, good. A group of soldiers, a platoon of soldiers, having a lot of social capital. A lot of soldiers will say they join because they love their country, but in the end they actually fight and follow orders and so on because they love their fellow soldiers in that group. They're really doing things in part due to the social capital that is built up there. Now, what are some low trust circumstances where there's very little social capital, little cooperation? Yeah. Prison. Okay, good. Prison is a sort of place where you go out to the prison yard and, you know, I can imagine a prison where people have this strong sense of solidarity and so forth, but most of the time that's not true. Most of the time there isn't much of a willingness to trust or cooperate with other people. Yeah.
Some workplaces.
Good. Well, some workplaces. The Office is a show based on a place with very little social capital. Yeah.
Brooklyn Nets.
The Brooklyn Nets, okay, good. A really divisive sports team, right? Some sports teams have a huge amount of social capital. People get along very well together, they cooperate a lot, strong norms of trust and togetherness and unity, others not so much. And so that's a case where you look at this and say, yeah, that kind of divisiveness on a team is a huge factor. Bill James is somebody who writes about the history of baseball and has brought a lot of statistical techniques to the study of baseball, has helped transform the game, as in movies like Moneyball. But anyway, he writes about one of the greatest players from a lot of points of view in baseball history, Rogers Hornsby, a second baseman, usually for the St. Louis Cardinals, though at times for the New York Giants. And he says, look, I wouldn't have Hornsby on my team no matter what, even if he's batting .424, which he did one year. I don't want Hornsby on my team. Why not? Because actually he said, look at every team that has Hornsby as a part of it. The year he joins the team does worse than it did the year before. And then he leaves, and the team does better. Hornsby was a negative for various baseball teams, even though statistically he was phenomenal. Now, how is that possible? He caused that kind of division. Okay, he was somebody who's all me. He didn't play well with others. He ended up lowering the trust and cooperation of the entire group. And there are people like that. The philosophy department at UT Austin. I mean, it is now a placid place where, at least in the faculty, I can't speak for the students, but among the faculty, we all get along well. There are these strong norms of cooperation. We hardly ever meet, and when we meet, it's all just like, I don't know, gosh, your idea is so brilliant. Well, your idea is brilliant too. That job candidate, that person's fantastic. Yours is too. So we all get along famously. But not so many years ago, it was a very divisive place. And largely because of one or two people who messed up the social capital for the rest. So it's easy for an organization to either improve greatly as a result of adding the right person or getting rid of the right person. And also then to go downhill in a similar way. And a lot of people have that experience with workplaces of all sorts of kinds. Now, okay, well, we've already talked about that. Forms of social capital in the university or in your hometown, places where it's strong, places where it's weak. Kipling thinks this is tremendously important. And also something that, at the time he was writing, certainly, people didn't have the vocabulary to talk about. He was concerned to say, some groups are very strong, other groups are not very strong. And it has to do with this sort of trust, willingness to cooperate, a feeling of a shared vision and a unity of purpose. Here's the way he puts it in a political context. When king and people understand each other past a doubt, it takes a foe and more than a foe to knock that country out. For the one will do what the other required as soon as the need is shown. And hand in hand they can make a stand which neither could make alone. So his idea is really that these norms, these shared values, are things that add a tremendous amount of strength to a society and are immensely important. Here's another place. It is nor wealth, nor talk, nor trade, nor schools, nor even the vote will save your land when the enemy's hand is tightening around your throat. But a king and a people who thoroughly trust each other in all that is done can sleep in their bed without any dread, for the world will leave them alone. That idea that trust, that cooperation, is really fundamental, is one of his most persistent themes, and something that comes up again and again in various poems. There's one more theme I want to talk about in a general way that I think is very important for Kipling. Because when he confronts various ideas about justice or equality or moral values and political ideals of a variety of kinds, he's concerned not so much to argue about those. He really doesn't debate moral questions or political questions in any of his works. But he is concerned to say there's something more fundamental even than all of those things, as important as they might be. The first virtue of a civilization is actually to survive. In John Rawls' famous book, A Theory of Justice, he says the first virtue of social institutions is justice. No matter how good, how productive something can be, if it is unjust, it must be rejected. Kipling would disagree. Kipling would say justice is all fine and good and important, but actually the first virtue of a society, of a civilization, must be to survive. You mustn't pursue some goal that will actually destroy the civilization. In Supreme Court jurisprudence, it's been put this way: the Constitution is not a suicide pact. And I think what he would say is civilization is not a suicide pact. It's important that civilization be able to survive, that above everything else. Now that's not to say it doesn't matter in what form it survives, that morality doesn't matter, that political ideals don't matter. Of course they do. It's just that you can't embrace an ideal that will end up destroying your civilization. So, sometimes he does this, as in the Mowgli stories, the Jungle Book, by talking about the law of the jungle. Now this is the law of the jungle, as old and as true as the sky. The wolf that shall keep it may prosper, but the wolf that shall break it must die. As the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, the law runneth forward and back. For the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. Notice how that ties together with this theme of social capital. That what makes you strong as an individual is partly the strength of the social bonds around you. What makes those strong is the strength of the individuals that comprise them. And so the group, the individual, they tend to be strong or be weak together. And in accordance with that, he's concerned to say, life is complicated. We're often facing trade-offs. We face difficult judgments. It takes real courage to live. Now, sometimes it's easy. Sometimes matters are simple. Sometimes moral questions don't come up at all. Sometimes those that do come up are very straightforward. But he said often we face things that are not so straightforward. And so recognize moral complexity. A lot of his poems are about people put in situations of moral complexity, where it is not easy to decide what to do, where they really face moral dilemmas. So, well, we already talked about that, so let me just go to examples of trade-offs. What are some examples of trade-offs that you as a person have to make in your own individual life? Things that are important, but you can't have everything, and you have to decide how much of one thing, how much of another. You have to strike some balance. What are some things that have to be balanced? Yeah?
Netflix and homework.
Netflix and homework. Very good. Netflix and homework. In general, leisure as opposed to work. That's something that you have to strike as a balance. Both are good things. And you have to figure out when it's worth putting off the homework and watching a movie on Netflix, when it would be a bad idea. Other examples. Yeah?
Eating the food you want to eat rather than the food you should eat.
Good. Eating the food you want to eat as opposed to the food you should eat. I may have mentioned to you that I'm tracking all the calories I consume. And, yeah, you face complex dilemmas. Like yesterday, I do a ton of yard work. I'm exhausted. My daughter orders pizza. And I sort of look at the app and think, oh man, I can really only manage like 2 slices of pizza. So how many do I eat? 5, actually. And so, yeah, that's a case where, you know, I've got this, so well, morally complex situation. I'm making trade-offs. This tastes really good, I'm really hungry, I'm feeling exhausted, and yet my app is saying, you know, 500 calories over your goal, whatever. What about trade-offs that we face as a society, that we face together? Yeah?
Will we replace our money for funding, governmental funding?
Oh, okay, yes. What do we want the government to do for us? I value keeping my own money, but I also think it's important that government do certain things. And so I think, well, what do I want government to do? But of course, that will cost money, and it's money that ultimately comes out of all of our pockets. And so we think, to what extent am I willing to sort of preserve choices for myself? To what extent am I willing to give them over to government? That's a kind of trade-off between the individual and the government's much greater power and ability to solve problems that we have to figure out. You know, how do we make that trade-off? And a lot of political philosophies are attempts to answer that question. A lot of the differences involve different ways of approaching that basic question. Of course, we might face within government a similar kind of trade-off. Given a certain set of financial resources, how do you budget? How do you decide what to spend that amount of money on? Economists used to explain this in terms of guns versus butter. To what extent do you spend on military expenditures? What do you spend on domestic expenses? Those are basic trade-offs you have to make too. Yeah?
Rather focus of the domestic policy versus foreign policy.
Good, domestic policy and foreign policy. Anybody is going to have, like a president has finite amounts of time, and so how much attention are you going to give various international problems? How much attention goes to various domestic problems? That's something that anybody who is in a kind of position where their role might affect both of those has to decide how to make those trade-offs. Can you think of other examples? Yeah. Good work or social life, not just individually, how hard should I work, but as a society, how hard do we expect people to work? It feels to me actually a lot of foreign visitors come here and say, Americans work so hard. Friends of mine who have moved, for example, to France say, wow, the French hardly work at all. I mean, they work a 30-hour week and then nobody shows up during the summer. Not just at universities, I mean anywhere. And so societies make different trade-offs among those things. Yeah?
Presidential elections?
Presidential elections are tricky because they involve many different trade-offs among many different dimensions. But you're right, no candidate is perfect. And so in those cases, people are often in a situation of saying, wow, which is the greater evil? Which is the lesser evil? And those kinds of things, and trading off various advantages and disadvantages. Yeah?
Like deciding to invest in a higher education.
Deciding to invest in higher education. Yes, as an individual or as a group, you're trading off a lot to be here. You could be out making money. You could be out having fun. You could be doing all sorts of things other than this. And so there are trade-offs involved in pursuing an education. Now, all of this is something that is fundamental to life, and we get a conception of moral virtue in Kipling's poem, If. This was voted by the British public their favorite poem, collectively. Okay, it's the most popular poem in English literature, if that survey is to be believed. And here's the entire poem. Now I want you to think, what are the moral ideals being held up here? If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken twisted by knaves, to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss and lose, and start again at your beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they're gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men out with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Now, I think there is an overarching theme to that poem. Maybe there are many themes. What kind of ideal is he upholding?
Being humble.
Being humble. Okay, good. Being humble. Not making too much of yourself, not counting too much about yourself. What are some other aspects of this ideal? Yeah?
Maintaining perspective and moderation.
Good. Retaining perspective and also moderation. Right? Doing this, but not too much. Aristotle had the idea, which Confucius actually had several centuries before, that virtue is a mean between extremes. It involves moderation. Doing this at the right time in the right way, in the right circumstances, for the right reason, but not going too far. And that's involved in a lot of this. Yes, have that virtue, but not too much, right? Be concerned with other people, but not too much. All of this, finding moderation, finding that proper balance, making the right trade. Other things, yeah. That's right, stoicism. You're willing to take everything and risk it all on one piss and toss and lose and then not say a word about your loss. Okay, that's sort of stoicism. I've known people who did that. Mortgage the house. Mortgage your wife's beloved Steinway piano. Do everything like this to start your business. And then fail. And start again. Okay? And not wallow in defeat. Just say, all right, well, we do it all again. And I've known somebody who's like that. And who does that. And doesn't go around saying, oh, poor me, and so on. Has done that sort of thing several times in his career. That's the sort of ideal that Kipling has here. Partly stoicism, willingness to put up with suffering, partly to just go on, to hold on, even when you seem exhausted and there's nothing else. So endurance, persistence, grit, determination, all of those things are fundamental to this idea. Anything else? Yeah.
I guess progress.
Progress, in what way?
Well, okay, is this after World War I?
This one, I don't know when this is written. That's a good question. When was this written? I think it's before, but I'm not certain of that.
Okay, well maybe, I guess in a broader term, societal progress, like focus on one thing, like we have to move on.
Ah, okay, that's right. Yeah, notice here, if we think of this at the social level, then imagine that he's talking not just to an individual, but to all of us together. Keep your head when all about you are losing theirs. Trust yourself, right? As a society. Make allowance for their doubting too. That is to say, don't be convinced you're always right. Wait, but don't get tired by waiting. You might think this is very good advice for any organization, any group of people, even an entire society or civilization. As a way of saying, yes, progress, keep on fighting for those ideals, even when things set you back. Don't give up. Now, yes. There's one last poem I want to talk about. It's maybe his most famous, or at least it's the one that's gotten the most play in recent decades, The Gods of the Copybook Headings. A copybook is something that you probably have never experienced. But I'm old enough that actually when I was learning to write, we used copybooks. We would write some famous quotation or some saying, some maxim, and then you would write it again and again. You would fill your workbook. At first, it was just like practicing the... Do people even learn cursive anymore?
We used to, not anymore.
Okay, yeah. This is how we learn cursive. You start by you just go, okay, A. And you would fill the page with A's. And then you started writing out these sentences. And then, of course, people would later in life just find neat quotations, and they would have a copybook, where here they weren't practicing their handwriting, but they were just making a book of quotations they had found that inspired them. And that's what you see here, one of these old copybooks with quotations from Confucius, from Coleridge, from Sir Philip Sidney, and so on. Now, here is his poem. The copybook headings are these eternal truths, these basic truths. And the theme of the poem is, in a way, that we inevitably seek something more. We try to deny these simple truths. There's something basic in human nature that leads us to deny them. And that nature keeps forcing us back and keeps enforcing the laws of the copybook headings. As I pass through my incarnations in every age and race, I make my proper prostrations to the gods of the marketplace. Peering through reverent fingers, I watch them flourish and fall. And the gods of the copybook headings, I notice, outlast them all. We were living in trees when they met us. They showed us, each in turn, that water would certainly wet us, as fire would certainly burn. But we found them lacking in uplift, vision, and breadth of mind. So we left them to teach the gorillas, while we followed the march of mankind. We moved as the spirit listed. They never altered their pace, being neither cloud nor windborne like the gods of the marketplace. But they always caught up with our progress, and presently word would come that a tribe had been wiped off its ice field, or the lights had gone out and grown. With the hopes that our world is built on, they were utterly out of touch. They denied that the moon was Stilton. They denied she was even Dutch. Do you know what he's talking about?
No.
The idea that the moon is made of cheese. They denied that wishes were horses. They denied that a pig had wings. So we worship the gods of the market and promise these beautiful things. Now here, notice, he's pretty hostile to the marketplace, to a sort of civilization that tries to get people to want all sorts of things they really do not need. Here, I just typed in luxury shopping areas. Anybody know what that is? Or this? Same place, actually. That's Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. All of that's underground. That's not the real sky. Okay, but then he goes on, and now, so far he's insulted capitalism, but he's going to keep going, okay? Just wait, I'll get to you. When the Cambrian measures were forming, they promised perpetual peace. They swore if we gave them our weapons, that the wars of the tribes would cease. But when we disarmed, they sold us and delivered us bound to our foe. And the gods of the copybook heading said, stick to the devil, you know. What's under attack here? Well, maybe religion, pacifism. I mean, at least that aspect of religion. And he's not yet writing about what happened at Munich. We'll get to that in a couple of weeks, but we'll see some examples of this. Now, feminism. On the first Flaminian sandstones, we were promised a fuller life, which started by loving our neighbor and ended by loving his wife. Till our women had no more children, and the men lost reason and faith. And the gods of the copybook heading said, the wages of sin is death. Now he's not arguing, again, conceptions of justice and so on. He's just saying, what happens to a society that won't defend itself? It gets conquered. What happens to a society that won't reproduce? Well, as a later wag put it, the future belongs to those who show up for it. This is a map of Europe, and you see lots of places there in green with negative birth rates. The population is falling. And here is a global picture of that. Only a few countries in the world are actually reproducing at more than just replacement rate, and lots are way, way behind. But now, as I said, we'll get to you. In the Carboniferous epoch, we were promised abundance for all, by robbing selected Peter to pay for collective Paul. But though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy. And the gods of the copybook heading said, if you don't work, you'll die. What's his target here? Socialism, yeah. So, wouldn't be a surprise to him that in socialist countries, there's lots of money, but nothing you can buy with it. These are scenes from contemporary Venezuela. Then the gods of the market tumbled, and their smooth-tongued wizards withdrew, and the hearts of the meanest were humbled and began to believe it was true, that all is not gold that glitters, and two make four. And the gods of the copybook headings lived up to explain it once more. Here he's talking about economic disasters and get-rich-quick schemes and things like that. I've lived through too many things. As it will be in the future, so it was at the birth of man. There are only four things certain since social progress began. That the dog returns to his vomit, and the sow returns to her mire, and the bird-fool's bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire. That after this is accomplished, that the brave new world begins, where all men are paid for existing and no man must pay for his sins, as surely as water will wet us, as surely as fire will burn, the gods of the copybook headings, with terror and slaughter return.